The way of things. We've talked a lot about different aspects of it. The way things were, the way things are, the way things should be, the way things could be, and the way things will be is the last aspect of this series of the way of things. And so this is the way things will be. There's no escape, there's no prevention, but there's a choice. And that is the ultimate focus of these messages as I've been presenting these messages just on the way of things and that wide spectrum, having that complete end-to-end perspective to make choices, because that's really what life is about, is to make choices, and especially making the ultimate choice. All choices are to get us to understand that the ultimate choice is necessary. If the ultimate choice wasn't there, then there would be no choices. God would just dictate. But God is not a dictator. He is a provider of opportunity. And that's what we see in the scriptures, that's what we see in life, and that's what history presents. An opportunity to make a choice for God, make a choice for ourselves. And so that is the idea of this message. But the way things will be, and as time began, even before the foundation of the world, everything was set, that there would be a great divide. And that's what I call this, the great divide, the ultimate divide. There was a division that started after Adam and Eve's sin, already acknowledged and distinctly determined by God before the creation of the world. God already referenced this, speaking about what would happen after he would create the world. And so was already distinguished. It was already fully determined. God had already chosen his side. God had already provided a plan, redemption, and everything was already set in stone. But the division started with Adam and Eve when they sinned in the garden. And this division is taking place very gradually as time passes on. In one generation, it is almost indistinguishable. But it will bring all of the human race before God to be judged. And from there, the ultimate separation will take place. And so this division that is taking place already, we are making choices constantly, and all those choices are part of laying that foundation or even part of making that ultimate choice for God. But this division is going to take place, and so everything started in perfect unity, and then there's a slow, graduate division, and some people will deny it because of how gradual it is. Because from the beginning till the end, it will be the complete division. And it will bring all people before God on one side or the other. Jesus spoke about this in Matthew chapter 25, when he spoke about the end time. He spoke of this. He says, when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. Before him will gather all nations, and he will separate people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And so that's how he's going to shepherd. It says, and he will place the sheep on his right, but the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. So from the foundation, this kingdom was prepared, and he's guiding a people into it. And people make choices daily, whether to reject that or to accept that, to follow that or to walk away from that. Verse 35 says, for I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me. Then the righteous will answer him, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and gave you drink? And when did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick and in prison and visited you? I mean, they were just like, when did we do this? And the king will answer them, truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers, you did it to me. How do we serve God? We cannot throw ourselves into heaven. We cannot go there. But what we do to others is serving God. Not necessarily are we serve God by serving others. We don't necessarily serve others by serving God. People do things for others in the name of themselves or for themselves, or just trying to be a good person. But those that are served God, how do we do it? We do it by serving others. And that's what they did. They helped others. In the name of the Lord, they helped others. It says, then he will say to those on the left, depart from me, you cursed, into eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. So all those that have rejected him will go into an eternal damnation that was prepared for the devil and his angels. But those that reject God, they choose ultimately to go with the devil, because those are the only two options. For I was hungry and you gave me no food. I was thirsty and you gave me no drink. I was a stranger and you did not welcome me. Naked and you did not clothe me. Sick and in prison and you did not visit me. Then they also will answer, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry and thirsty and a stranger and naked or sick or in prison and did not minister to you? Then he will answer them, saying, truly I say to you, as you did not do one another to the least of these, you did it not to me. And this will go, he says, and these will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. Speaking about the ultimate division that will take place. That's what this world is going to. That's what we are going to. Which side do we want to be on? Now, often we want the fruits of one side, but be on the other. It is a completeness. It is a life, and that's exactly what he illustrates here. It's not just a choice, but a lifestyle that we live. I know our lifestyle doesn't save us. God saves us, but it guides us into a lifestyle. And that's really what he said. And some, they want the life, but they don't want the lifestyle. And by the lifestyle, they reject the life. And so we don't choose a lifestyle, we choose a life. We don't choose... we choose between God and Satan. We choose between heaven and hell. We choose between giving our life or taking our life, or saying living for self or living for others. We choose between those things, but we're not necessarily choosing that lifestyle, but it results in a lifestyle, and really it's one path or the other. And so it's a completeness, not just I'm on this side, but I do the things of that side. If I am on the right side, I got to do the things of the right side. And if I'm on the left, I got to do the things of the left. And so he's talking about this ultimate division that's going to take place. The lost speaks about 2 Peter 2 verse 6. It says, if by turning these cities of Sodom and Gomorrah to ashes in condemnation, them to extinction says, making them an example of what is going to happen to the ungodly. And so he says that's an example. Revelation 20 verse 11 says, then I saw a great white throne, and him who was seated on it. From the presence, the earth and the sky fled away, and no place was found for them. And I saw that the dead, great and small, standing before the throne, and books were opened. Then another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged by what was written in the books according to what they had done. And the sea gave up the dead who were in it. Death and Hades gave up the dead who were in them. And they were judged, each one of them, according to what they had done. Then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. This is the second death, the lake of fire. And if anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire. And so it talks about what will happen to those who do not have Jesus Christ as their personal Savior. They will be thrown into a lake of fire with Satan and his angels. And the lake of fire, it's called the lake of sulfur, where the false prophet and the beast, the devil, will be. Revelation 19 verse 20 says, and the beast was captured with the false prophet who in its presence had done the signs by which he deceived those who had received the mark of the beast and those who worshipped its image. These two were thrown alive into the lake of fire that burns with sulfur. And it's in verse 10 of Revelation 20, it says it's a place without end. It says, and the devil who had deceived them was thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur, where the beasts and the false prophets were, and they will be tormented day and night forever and ever. Verse 14, it says, and death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. This is the second death in the lake of fire. And if anyone's name was not found written in the book, they were cast into the lake of fire. And then it talks about the saved. The saved speaks about in Revelation, the very next chapter. So Revelation chapter 20 is really dedicated to describing what happens to those that reject Jesus Christ. And then the last verse says, if anyone's not found written in the book of life, he is cast into the lake of fire. But then that's the last verse in the chapter. And in chapter 21, verse 1, and it carries on in the beginning, really just describing what will happen to those who have their name written in the book of life. And so that ultimate divide in where they will end up. It says, then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And I saw the holy city, the New Jerusalem, it says, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared for a bride, adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more, neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain anymore, for the former things have passed away, it says. And he who was seated on the throne said, behold, I am making all things new. Also he said, write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true. And he said to me, it is done. I'm the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I will give from the spring of water of life without payment. The one who conquers will have this heritage, and I will be his God, and he will be my son. And then verse 8 says, but as for the cowardly, the faithless, detestable, as for murderers, the sexual immoral, sorcerers, idolaters, and all liars, their portion will be in the lake that burns with fire and sulfur, which is the second death. Talking some verses about the great divide. What will happen when this ultimate separation is taking place? What I want to do is I want to talk about some things. Where does this division begin? Because sometimes we just like, I'm going to live my life and make my choice at the end. It is not how it works. I'm not saying that no people can make a choice at the end. God is merciful. But when we have that attitude that I'm going to do it later, we actually making already the wrong choice. And so we don't push up the choice. Now there's people that didn't know about the choice, or we're not really serious about the choice, but we're willing to make the choice. God is merciful. But to push it away is really to make the wrong choice. Let's look at some of the things that present this choice to us on a daily basis and how they have throughout history. As we look at these steps in the Great Divide, I want to talk about 7 steps that kind of present this divide that will cause all mankind to be divided into 2 groups. And really, it's all part of choices. Choices we make, and the ultimate choice, as already has been stressed. And so wherein can we see this ultimate divide? There's obviously there's more, but 7 very foundational, very presenting a choice for humanity. And so where are these 7 things? Number 1, creation versus evolution. Where we believe that we are coming from sets the beginning of the stage of where we will be going. Where we believe we are coming from sets the stage for where we will be going. Really, do we believe in God created us, or do we believe that we evolved? Genesis 1:1, God is very clear. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And as chapter 1 and chapter 2 describes that God created all things. God created humanity. God created the animals. God created the universe. God created it just goes kind of step by step in declaring how God created all things. Now, there are some people that believe in evolution. Now, creation, we have full evidence for. Evolution, we have no evidence. Some would say, look, I am evidence of evolution. But if we take, for an example, the last 250 years and we collect all the evidence of evolution, we would come up with 0 of them. And so if we have 0 in 50 years, or in 100 years, or in 250 years, that means there's none, because the stage clearly sets, the arrow clearly points to a continuous 0, because 0 times 0 still adds 0. And so you don't change the numbers by, even though if we don't have records from before, and we do have records from before, but there's no evidence in my life, 0 evidence in my life. I am 53 years old, and so if I collect evidence of evolution in my life, I come up with the number 0. If I collect evidence in my parents, I come up with 0. I collect evidence in my grandparents, it is always 0. There is 0 evidence for evolution. Nothing evolves today, so therefore nothing has ever evolved. And so the support is 100% on creation. But what do we want? Where do we believe that we're coming from will set the stage on where we will end up. And so that's foundational for us to believe that God created the heavens and the earth for us to ultimately end up with God again. If we don't believe we come from Him, and obviously those that don't believe that they come from Him don't believe that they need to go back to Him because they don't believe in Him, but they will run into Him just on the wrong side, on the condemnation, not on the justification. And so, but that is really what it comes down to. Where are we coming from? And that's why some people would
fight so hard on evolution because they want to avoid this choice. They don't want the weight on our choices. I want to make choices without consequences, and therefore I'm just going to deny the consequences, and therefore I can freely make choices, but they will suffer the ultimate consequence. And so there is creation versus evolution, and this is not a message on creation versus evolution, so therefore I'm not going to get into a lot of detail on that, but I want to just go and then just kind of set that stage for the choices that we make. Secondly, it is God versus humanism. God versus humanism. The idea of humanism is not that one believes in both God and humanity, but that humanity replaces God. And that's the idea behind humanism, because really, life only gives us one side. And so some people would say, I believe I believe in humanity. I believe that the good comes from humanity. I believe that the strength comes from humanity. I think that life comes from humanity. I think authority comes from humanity. I think choices come from humanity. But I also believe that there is a God. You cannot believe because humanism is the idea that there is nothing beyond, that we are the greatest source. And so the idea of humanism is not that one believes in both God and humanity, for we obviously know that there is humanity and there's God. And so we can believe that they both exist, but the humanism is really the idea of that humanity replaces God. And God means supreme being, the ultimate being. And so really, if we believe that we are the ultimate being, then we would just believe that we are God. Some people say, would maybe not openly say, but think this: I have no problem with there being a God. I just have a problem with the fact that I'm not He. That is generally the case. That was Satan's issue. Satan did not want just eliminate God because he couldn't, because God is right there, but he wanted to be in his place. He wanted to be in the seat of God, and that was his pride. People who are happy just being people are happy people. But those who want to be in the place of God are always disappointed. When we accept that we are just people, then we can be happy. But when we don't accept that we are God's created beings, and we are people and God is God, then we're going to be very unhappy. People are very unhappy not because of what they fail to do, but failing to meet their expectations. And that is what disappoints them. God's expectations of us as sinners are zero. God has no expectations of us other than this one thing, is to make a choice. That's the only expectation God has from us. God does not expect us to produce. God does not expect us to be mighty, to be powerful. He expects nothing other than simple a choice from us, which is the easiest thing to do and yet the hardest thing to do. But that is the only thing that God expects. But we sometimes have very unrealistic expectations because we put ourselves in a place where we don't belong. We put ourselves in the place of God. Now, should we have expectations from ourselves? Especially as God's people, yes, for by faith, Jesus says, greater things than these should you do than I did. I mean, and he was doing miracles and amazing things, and he says, greater things you can do. So, yeah, we should have great expectations, but through faith, by faith, not from within ourselves. As myself, as a person I need to accept myself as a person and be happy that I'm a person, not expect supernatural powers from me, not expect supernatural ability, not expect supernatural, nothing. I should be good living 24 hours a day, living a good and upright life. I should be completely happy with that. And so people who are happy just being people, they are happy people. But people who are not happy being people, they are unhappy people. And so we need to just be people. Matthew 16:23 says, "But he turned and said to Peter, 'Get thee behind me, Satan. You are a hindrance to me, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man.'" And so God wants us to consider that he is God. Peter was just speaking in human terms. Colossians 2:8 says, "See to it that no one takes you captive by philosophy and empty deceit according to human tradition, according to the element spirits of the world, and not according to Christ." Number 3 is Bible versus philosophy. Jesus addressed this issue head on in John chapter number 3. In verse 8, he says, "The wind blows where it wishes, and you hear it sound, but you cannot know where it comes from or where it's going." And it says, "In the same way, or so is everyone that's born of the Spirit." Absolute liberty, absolute freedom. Absolute, the wind is not bound in anywhere. You can't put a law to it. You can't damage it. You can't injure it. The strongest weapon in the world cannot damage it. Wind is absolutely free. And then it says, and he was having a conversation with Nicodemus, and then Nicodemus says, "How can these things be?" And in verse 10, he says, "You're a teacher and you don't know these things. You're a teacher of religion, you don't know these things." And in verse 11, Jesus says, "Truly, truly, I say to you, we speak of what we know and bear witness of what we have seen, but you do not receive our testimony." And so Jesus says, we all, and me likewise, I testify of what I've seen and what I know, and you don't believe my testimony. Then he says, "If I have told you earthly things and you do not believe, how can you believe if I tell you heavenly things?" And that's really the issue. Believing beyond our philosophy, beyond our humanistic ways. And he says, if you don't believe earthly things, you just simply have your philosophies of life, and I show you realistically something from what's happening in this creation, you don't believe it. You're so deeply philosophical that you won't even believe facts from this earth. How will you believe heavenly things? And that is really the issue. It says, "No one has ascended into heaven except he who descends from heaven, the Son of Man. And then as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up." And it says that whoever believes in him may have eternal life. And so really, believing what God says over believing what we have established in ourselves. And really, it starts by us not even believing facts. People don't believe the Bible because they don't believe facts. It is really not, it's not facts versus Bible. It's philosophy versus Bible. They have developed a philosophy. They love darkness rather than light, as the next verses carry on to say. That light has come into the world, and we love darkness rather than light. And so we like our sinful ways, our darkness, and that's what philosophy does. Philosophy is a covering for facts. If we would simply take facts for facts, we don't need a philosophy. We don't need any ounce of philosophy if we simply take facts for facts. But because we don't, many don't, they develop a philosophy to cover those facts. Philosophy, a theory of attitude held by a person or organization that acts as a guiding principle for behavior. Really, I want to live this way, and I'm going to develop myself a philosophy that supports that covers consequences, that covers facts, that covers truth, that covers God. And I'm going to develop myself a philosophy on how to live that I can comfortably live in that. And that's really what it is. I want to support my behavior, and so I need a philosophy because fact always strikes me in the heart and convicts me about my ways. Colossians 2:8 says, "See to it that no one takes you captive by philosophy." No one tries to cover your behavior with their philosophy, because then you have to adopt their philosophy. Take you captive by philosophy in empty deceit according to human tradition, according to the elemental spirits of the world, and not according to Christ. And so the world and humanity. And so we have to be careful about philosophy so it's really philosophy versus the Bible is the choice. Number 4, science versus experience. Now, a lot is blamed on science. Many people replace science with experience, and with that experience that they replace science with is mixed with opinion, preference, emotion, belief, and it is very much used to seek to sway people. And so I feel this way, and so therefore this is science, but they mix it with emotion, preference, belief, opinion. And then it's no longer science. For an example, a man has a relationship with a woman that goes really bad. Experience. Plus he has a friend that ended in the same situation with his woman, his lady. Now, he concludes that scientifically, man and woman cannot be perfectly unified or function together, because he has two acts of experience, and now there's emotion, there's preference, there's simply just bad experience, or experience that, and now he said, because look at 2, now we have science. That's not science, that's experience. And so really, often it's experience to reject science. It's not experience to seek to search out science, because science stays the same. Experience change back and forth and stuff like that. And so really it is experience versus science, which we see over and over in the world. Experience is simply adding one situation, participation, results to science, instead of interpreting the science simply based on the makeup of all substance and how things react to each other. So experience is simply adding one situation, participation, results to science. And so we must keep experience separate. Now, people have bad experience, but we have to accept science. We can change our experience, but we cannot change science. Science is something we have to accept as fact. What it says is what science is the intellectual and practical activity encompassing this systematic study of the structure and behavior of the physical and natural world through observation and experiment, is what it says. The intellectual and practical activity encompassing the systematic study of and so it's really how things are made up and how they react to each other. That's science. That's kind of the foundation of science. You add experience to it, you are actually rejecting science. What it says about practice is practical contact with an observation of facts or events. It's practical contact to it. And so I can say that fire and functions in such a way as scientifically. Now I touch it, that's practice. And so it's really, we cannot have our practice and say 10 people, this happened to 10 people, so therefore it's scientific. No. Science we have to study separate from practice. Science has to stay within itself to define itself. We cannot take science out of science and take it into practice and conclude what it is. Science is the makeup and the function or the reaction of substance. How things react to each other, what they're made up of. And so we can't take science outside of science to interpret science. That doesn't work. Then it longer isn't science. And that is really a choice we make because we want to have our experience, our philosophy, and we want to blame science. It's not science. Science is something that we can depend on. It's foundational. It doesn't change. Now, number 5, righteousness versus religion. Many people believe that religions are what capture the heart, the mind, and the ways of the Lord, but the opposite is actually true. The greatest opposition the Lord Jesus faced while on earth, not that the opposition stopped when he returned to heaven, was the religious fanatics. They were convinced that they had God in a box, captured and under their control. Yet, the opposite was true. They were not even part of God and his plan. They had no part in his work and were not walking in his ways. Jesus described to Nicodemus, a religious leader, I would say, his remaining need, but it was in reality his actual need, which was to be born from above of the Holy Spirit. Jesus revealed an amazing truth toward the end of their discussion. John 3:8. The wind blows where it wishes, and you hear the sound, but you cannot tell where it comes from and where it's going. So is everyone that is born of the Spirit. Wind cannot be captured, it cannot be damaged, it cannot be brought under any laws or rules. It is completely free, only subject to its creator. It says that it is how the believer is. Only subject to its creator. Religions are, the focus of religions is to build a platform on which we can meet God. That is the general idea of religion. We will build this religion, and in this religion, you can have a platform to meet God. But the actuality of religion is not to build a platform to meet God, but to replace the already established platforms to meet God. The platforms to meet God is creation, believing in creation. Creation testifies. Conscience, God has given us a conscience so that we can connect to God, that we can come to God. And so creation is a light, conscience, and then of course, God's laws. They are a platform, God's standards are a platform for us to meet God. Religion seeks to replace that. That's what religion. And so it's really religion versus righteousness. And so do we want religion, which is just a ritualism, formality, and such, or do we want to God's righteousness? Do we want to be made righteous by God? And so that's the option is religion versus righteousness. And James 2:23 says, and the scripture was fulfilled that says, Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him as righteousness. And he was called the friend of God. 2 Corinthians 5:21 says, for our sake he made him to be sin for who knew no sin, Jesus Christ, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. Righteousness is something that we receive. Righteousness is something that is within us that's accepted by God. Religion is just a practical thing that doesn't change people other than for bad. So religion versus righteousness, another choice. Fact versus foolishness. Psalm 14 says that foolishness is, it says, I was thinking of Proverbs, foolishness is bound in the heart of a child. Psalm 14 and also Psalm 53, it says, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. And it says, they are corrupt, they do abominable deeds, there is none who does good. The Lord looked down from heaven on the children of man to see if there's any that understood. And so then he carries on, it says, they turned aside, they gathered to have become corrupt, there is none who does good, they have no knowledge, they're evildoers, they eat up, it says, they eat up my people as bread. In other words, they destroy God's people. There's, it says that they are in great terror, for God is with the righteous, or the generation of the righteous. And so really talking about a fool. What is the definition of a fool? A fool is really that questions or opposes everything that is fact. Something, this is so, and a fool will question it, but a wise man will accept that. And that is really going against God in every way. Opposing God in every way. And so there's rejecting the facts and accepting the foolishness. 1 John chapter number 5 talks about receiving the testimony of God. It says that God has given testimony of what he has done and how he has brought his son. And so are we willing to accept the facts as facts, or are we willing to be foolish? Number 7 is salvation versus condemnation. 1 John 5, and I already just mentioned it, but verse 12 says, whoever has the Son has life. Whoever does not have the Son of God does not have life. Saved versus law, salvation versus condemnation. Steps that divide us, that separate us, that make choices. Sometimes we say, oh, it's not a big deal. They are all part of the ultimate deal. Where do you stand? And you can be right on the first 6 and avoid the number 7. The truth is, it is step by step by step. I agree. God, you're right. God, you're right. God, you're right. God, it's you. God, you created me. God, you are the Savior. God, you are the source of knowledge. God, your word is true. The conclusion to the entire thing, to the entire 8 messages that I preached, is this. There's a great explanation in the scriptures that really give these whole messages the way of things. A conclusion. And that conclusion is recorded in Deuteronomy chapter 30 and verse number 19. God is going to set the record straight here. It's like the people are here and God comes and speaks with the people. And he says, I want to tell you something. that I've done. But don't just take my word for it. I want to call heaven and earth to witness against you today, he says. And that's what the beginning of the verse says. He says, I call heaven and earth to witness against you today, to witness, to testify. So heaven and earth will take the witness stand and give testimony, give declaration, give facts. Be a constant presence to testify that this indeed is so. Look at heaven and earth and deny me this fact. You can't. The evidence is constantly in heaven. As Psalm 19 says, the heaven declares the glory of God, his handiwork. I mean, the earth, you see the fruit of the human ways, but you see the design of God. And so heaven and earth, he says, I'm going to call them to the witness stand, and they will declare simply this. He says that I have set before you life and death. This is what heaven and earth will testify. And that's what we've been talking about, these messages, the way of things, the way things are, the way things were, the way things should be and we know it, the way things could be and we know it, the way things will be and we know it. Because we've heard the testimony, we see the testimony on a daily basis. God has set before us life and death. Both of them are constantly there. He says, blessing and cursing. I've set them before you. And then he says there's a choice. Not choices, but a choice. That choice is often, like we've talked about, this separated in many choices. But he says, therefore, choose life, that you and your offspring may live. Because of this, because of what I have done, and the heavens and the earth testify. Make your choice. Don't reject the testimony. Don't reject God, because not only say, boy, just his word. Look at heaven and earth, and you cannot deny that there is a choice of cursing and blessing, a choice of life and death, a way of life that we and our offspring may live. Choose life, because that's the way it is. That's what God has presented. Avoid the wrong side of the ultimate division. May God help you and bless you.
Thank you for listening to this message. I hope it was a blessing to you. We have a ministry called Answers, providing scripturally based answers for life's questions. If you have any question about life, about the scriptures, please send us that question and we will send you an answer. The send button is just below the video. You can just press the send button and send us a message, and you will hear from us very shortly. May God bless you.